It's Legal AF YouTube, so it must be unprecedented with Michael Popok and Dina Sayegh, where we cover the week's major events inside and outside the courtroom at the United States Supreme Court, the ones that we think you need to know about at the intersection of law and politics. Let me welcome, coming into the holidays now, let me welcome Dina. I haven't seen you. God, I haven't seen you in God, six or 8 months, right? In person.
Yeah, it was when you came out for Ben's wedding was the last time. So yeah, we got to do another get together for sure.
Oh, no doubt, no doubt. And we will find a way. Let's talk about today's topic. How you doing? You and your family doing well?
Yeah, we're good. I mean, I think it's like everyone else. It seems like we went from shock of the election straight into the holidays, and it's cold here actually in LA, which I know for New York that sounds strange, but it legitimately is cold here. So it's feeling like the holiday season.
I feel you. I lived in Miami for 20 years, where when it dropped below 70 degrees, everybody broke out the furs and the leather boots. I was like, okay,
yeah,
I'm here for it.
It's 57 today, so that's good for it. Cool for us.
We got a bunch of things. We're coming into the 1/3 mark of this Supreme Court term, with the presidency about to change hands in January. But the work of the Supreme Court, whether you like it or not, continues. The government is Biden and is represented by his Solicitor General in his office of the Solicitor General. For those that ask that question, what happens now after the election? Nothing. We're in lame duck everything. Lame duck Solicitor General. They argue, the things are briefed. Sure, the reality is that a new Solicitor General, likely named John Sauer, one of Donald Trump's former criminal defense lawyers or current criminal defense lawyers, is going to be coming in. And he may reverse course on a number of pending matters. But we got to take the oral arguments on the docket as they come. There's no timeout because there's been an election in any way. And so a couple of interesting things, one outside the court and one or two inside the court. The one outside the court is that, we'll dive into it with you, Dina. Joe Manchin, on the way out as West Virginia senator, has decided it's high time for the United States Supreme Court justices to have term limits. And we'll talk about a proposal there. Seems to have some bipartisan support, and the reason that he did that. And then we've got two rulings. One, a major ruling that I can't even describe to you how important this is going to be, the final decision about how the government can protect your air, your water, your life, your health, and environment when it approves of projects. Major case in front of the Supreme Court. We call it the 7 counties case. It has to do with the transport of a certain type of petroleum product, some sort of oil product, through a line of rail yards and a system of tracks in and out of Colorado. And the question is, if you want to have sticky petroleum or whatever it is, sticky oil being carted in large tankers through your town, and that could lead to spills and other things. We're going to find out if the United States Supreme Court is going to allow regulatory bodies like the Surface Transportation Board, the STB, to regulate in that area, and how deeply to regulate in that area. Or are they just going to let big industry and big railroads decide about our public health and the environment? And we're going to talk about that case under the National Environmental Policy Act. We're going to nerd out on NEPA, but what it means to you on a daily, in your daily life. And then we've got a if you blinked, you missed it. It was a one-liner about a gag order related to Donald Trump in his criminal cases in New York, and what the United States Supreme Court, Justice Alito of all people, will describe why Alito did that and why it wasn't Sotomayor, who sits over New York, when we do our full-blown unprecedented. So Dina, without further ado, let me turn it over to you. And let's make it potluck. What do you want to go with first? You want to go with Manchin, or you want to go with NEPA?
So let's start with Manchin, since that one's fairly quick. So Senator Manchin and Senator Welch together proposing a constitutional amendment to limit the Supreme Court justices to 18-year term limits. As we know, a constitutional amendment would require 2/3 of both the House and the Senate to approve it. And then it would have to go to the state legislatures, and 2/3 of the state legislatures would have to approve it in order for it to formally happen. But even the idea that we have senators like proposing this, frankly, it's the first time it's happened, and it's about time. The polling shows how, I think the Annenberg School of Communication, my alma mater, actually said that it's something like 68% of the Americans are in favor of term limits for Supreme Court justices. So this is a very popular idea, and how it would be implemented under their proposal would be, it wouldn't affect the current justices, but as that justice steps down, this would start being implemented until you finally have every 2 years, a president would appoint a justice. And they say plainly the reason is to kind of remove politics from the appointments and, all of that. Would it remove politics? I think maybe an easier way to remove politics would actually be to re-implement a 2/3 vote rather than the simple majority that wouldn't require a constitutional amendment. You would have to get both sides of the aisle to approve it. But there doesn't seem to be any willingness from the senators, let's say, to do that. So otherwise, Supreme Court term limits make a lot of sense. We have term limits in every other powerful position in our country. Why not the Supreme Court? I think there's an argument to be made that a lot of times Supreme Court justices take a while to find their footing. Sometimes, as we know, they become more liberal, usually as it goes along, such as Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, who was appointed by a Republican, ended up upholding in Casey versus Planned Parenthood, their reproductive rights. So that might go away a little bit. 18 years may not be enough time to, say. But I think overall, I think this idea that the Supreme Court as is failing the American people is absolutely right. And to have this proposal put out there to further the discussion is a good thing. We need to do something. The fact that so many Americans don't trust the highest court in our land is really bad for democracy.
And the Supreme Court, I agree with you. I think the United States Supreme Court is, what Roberts is going to say, Chief Justice Roberts. Yeah. The separation of powers, you can't do a darn thing about our structure, which is completely wrong. The Constitution gives the power to Congress to set the number of justices and how they serve. Now, nothing in the Constitution says you get a lifetime appointment. This does not have to be a constitutional amendment in order for it to happen, I don't believe. Do you believe it has to be a constitutional amendment?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's vague, right? And the Supreme Court interprets the Constitution. So yes, they are the ones who are going to interpret the vague thing, because it says that they're appointed for as long as they have good behavior. That's the specific language. Yeah. So you
not
can
for
say,
life.
Yeah, you can say because it doesn't say life, that means they don't. But then you can argue it the other way around. If they wanted a term limit, they could have said it. They said it for president, blah, 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 blah. So I think practically you'll need a constitutional amendment, because I don't think the court itself will interpret it to give themselves less power.
Well, that's the case. Look, let's just call it out. It's never going to happen, because it's going to take 2/3 of the House and the Senate to propose it. And then it has to go to the states for ratification. They're better off with changing the number than they are, but I don't want to change now. I wanted to change when Joe Biden was in charge. Right. Let's get to 13. People who don't follow it closely don't realize that number has popped up and down over the last 2 centuries. It started out as 6, and it went to 7, 8. It never went higher than 9. And then it landed on 9 and stayed at 9. But everyone's like, oh, it's 9. It's always been 9. It's not 9. And it's not 9 in the Constitution. But you're right. Anytime we're going to, the Supreme Court is being asked to police itself. We know how that goes. Not well. Ethics code, not if we don't have to. Right. They're not going to limit themselves in any way. And because they won't also allow any infringement on their turf under this guise of separation of powers and 3 co-equal branches, it just makes them completely lawless. We have a lawless United States Supreme Court. We could have also called this show Lawless.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, they're just completely out of control because they just thumb their nose. Congress wants them to come and talk about things. The Judiciary Committee, senators. No, that violates separation of powers. And yet, who controls them? They did a great job inflating the power of the presidency in their immunity decision. So we don't have 3 co-equal branches anymore. We got one out of control branch and the other 2 branches sit on its lap. Which is exactly the king structure that our founding fathers ran away from and did not want to be a part of our constitutional republic. Remember King George? I mean, this is the reason we left. And we didn't want to create king anything. You fill in a Democrat or Republican. It's not a Democrat or Republican point of view. So, listen, I was like, okay, that's nice, Joe Manchin. Good for you. You propose it. I just don't see any scenario where this passes. I mean, in our America, having a constitutional amendment take a whistle-stop tour around the country trying to get votes like the Equal Protection Act.
Right.
Right. It's just not going to happen. We can't agree on 2/3 of anything, in this country. So I like, it was interesting. Joe Biden should have packed the court before he left.
Yeah.
And that's where you and I are going to have to keep an eye on. And hot takes in here on Unprecedented is that this is sort of related. Joe Biden is going to veto the Judges Act, in which 65 new federal judges were going to be created, not vacancies, new federal judge positions in places like Texas and California and other places. And everybody was in favor of it. It was like a bipartisan thing. And then the Republicans and MAGA played politics with it. They passed it in the Senate, and then it sat around because they were waiting to see if Trump was going to win or not. And the House never took it up. And now that Trump won, it's like, okay, now we're going to put it in place and let Trump have 65 more. No. It was supposed to be Biden's 65,
right.
At least to get started, not yours. And so Biden's like, no, you're the same senators that are trying to horse trade me on my last judge positions. Biden had to give up 6 positions, including circuit courts, appeal courts, because of the horse trade. And now he's like, F that. I'm not going to do you any favors. Now, could MAGA Congress with a very slim margin, like it's got like a 2-seat margin right now in the House, could it pass a bill where it could expand the federal judiciary a la Reagan in the 1980s, where Donald Trump gets like 400 or 500 more federal court positions? It could.
Yeah.
It's a very narrow margin there, right?
Yeah, but it is in some ways not controversial. The only thing that's controversial about it is we don't want Trump to do the appointing. The fact of the matter is we don't have enough judges. We don't have enough federal judges. I mean, a friend of mine is like, a state court judge, and he has like thousands of cases on his docket. It shouldn't be that way. We don't have enough judges, period. It's a real problem. But, like you said, politics was played on it, and it would be a disaster to have the Trump MAGA. That's why if anybody's willing to increase the percentage back to a super majority to appoint judges, that would solve this problem. But again, I don't think the Republicans are going to be willing to do that. But we do need to increase the judiciary. And ideally, you do it so it's kind of spread out over time, maybe. So no one president has that much power. But
that's what this one was. The Judges Act was 3 administrations, but the first one was supposed to be Biden.
Okay. Yeah.
Instead, they took it for themselves, and Biden's like, F that. Like, I like this version of Joe Biden. I hate talking about him as lame duck, but I do love everything that he's doing. 1,500 clemencies petitions granted today, commuting the sentence, shortening and ending the sentence for lots of nonviolent rehabilitated people, 34 pardons for people whose only crime was who they loved in the military, gays in the military, and things like that. I like this. There's not enough pardons. You and I'll keep talking about pardon.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing that this Supreme Court agrees. Pardon power can't be touched. Doesn't matter what the person does.
Exactly. It's within his purview, and hopefully he'll commute the federal death row. I was thinking when he did the thing today, I don't know why he didn't just do it the same day as Biden, pardoning his son. Yes, Hunter, like just group it together, give people lots to talk about.
Because Joe has this stubborn streak of being honest and fair. And he wanted that to stand on its own with a memo, because he's going to go out the way he came in. He's Joe Biden. He's Amtrak Joe. Yeah. And the politics would have been, as you said, to bury it, bury it in the box.
Yeah.
But Joe was like, no, and I'll write a memo too. Like, right. Okay.
Because he didn't need to even write the memo. Like, to your point, he has but Trump didn't write those memos.
You think Trump's going to write a memo for the Jan Sixers? He's going to pardon on day one?
No. Absolutely not. No.
All right. So that's the stuff in and around the federal courts and the federal judiciary, and the chances. MAGA loves having their justices die in office. They love them and they don't want them to move. And you're usually right. They usually get more liberal, but Gorsuch is an example, although he recused himself for the next case we're going to talk about. Gorsuch has gotten more right-wing MAGA as he's been there. He's felt the pull of Alito and Clarence Thomas, and we'll talk about that. So why don't we move in for our last story today about this National Environmental Policy Act, which people are like, what is that? And the Surface Transportation Board, people are like, what is that? These are things that matter to your daily life, but that's why we got to talk about them. You like railway cars filled with toxic chemicals going through your town? The thing that stops that is NEPA and the regulations around it, and agencies like the Safety Transportation Board, which is exactly what it sounds like. It looks at safety in transportation as a board. And now the Supreme Court is going to taken up a case to touch that area of the law about environmental regulation through transportation laws in a case, and they haven't touched this like in 20 years. There's a whole new group, and we know they hate the environment. We know they hate clean water and clean air, and they hate public health. That's, if you can say anything about the MAGA Supreme Court, that's about it. They're for business and they're against the American voter. I'm sorry, it's just no other way to put it. And so we had an oral argument in a case that we refer to as the seven counties infrastructure coalition. It's a group. It's really the owners of trains. It's the railway industry. They got a great name. It sounds like it's a coalition of counties. Yeah, it's a bunch of guys that own trains and train companies. And they've sued Eagle County, Colorado. I think Eagle County sued first over the red tape that they're enduring to try to get this dirty oil transportation network built to go through places in the Rockies and other places. And the counties are upset because they don't think NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, went far enough, and that the Safety Transportation Board didn't go far enough in coming up with an environmental impact statement. They don't think it went far enough in what we call upstream and downstream environmental impacts at all. But you have to do it in a 150-page statement, which is weird. There's a page limit, which came up during the hearing, the oral argument, which is really weird. And just to put a little bit of reality on this argument, I'll turn it over to you now. It takes on average 4.5 years to get a project's environmental impact statement prepared and successfully submitted. So this is not like, oh, well, it doesn't delay. And that's, where MAGA is going to go with that. Oh, projects, 4.5 years will be delayed because of these ridiculous remote environmental impacts that, tree huggers are looking at that don't really matter. I mean, just today or yesterday, Donald Trump tweeted to the world, do you have $1 billion to invest? Like he's selling like at late night TV.
Oh, right.
Do you have $1 billion to invest in America? We will speed you through all your permits, including environmental. He actually wrote environmental, including environmental, in order to get that $1 billion. Let's get ready to rock. I mean, that's the president, incoming president of the United States. You don't think this MAGA on this Supreme Court hears that? Talk about what happened and talk about why Gorsuch wasn't there.
Well, so Gorsuch wasn't there because he used to be a lawyer, and that lawyer had, for a businessman that had a stake in this, and that businessman had also kind of helped him and supported him. May probably paid for some fundraisers for him. So that's why he recused himself. Although he didn't actually say why he recused himself, because they don't have to, but that's how you can think about it. So good on him. The more these justices realize their own conflict of interest, the less we have to talk about unprecedented about how unethical they are. So he wasn't on the court. To your point about, the MAGAs kind of like being their interest being pro-business, I feel like Justice Kavanaugh, yet again, was almost the one who bothered me the most. He's coming to bother me the most, even more than Alito and Thomas, which I know is crazy. But Alito and Thomas are like consistent and they're crazy. Like, you know what I mean? Like they're always are going to take that point of view. But Justice Kavanaugh is like the wind. He's not that states' rights versus federal rights, small government versus big government. It's more about, are my interests being protected? And then how am I going to get there? Because it was laughable that in this situation, he said that, well, maybe, because here, like you said, the government was going to allow this project to go forward. And it was the county who came in and said, wait, you didn't look enough at, beyond the upward and downward effects. And so Justice Kavanaugh said, well, maybe we should just be saying we should defer, right, to federal agencies' opinion here, which is the exact opposite of what they just did, like 6 months ago, where they overturned Chevron, where the courts were supposed to defer to the federal agencies, but now courts have like more review over it. So his positions are inconsistent, let's say, in those kind of like typical judicial point of views. He is all about, like you said, business, and how am I going to get there? And which judicial theory am I going to use? So Justice Kavanaugh now all of a sudden wants to defer to government agencies. This is where he's at here. But the basic idea is the government only looked at those 88 miles, essentially, and this oil is going to be brought to the Gulf states because that's where the refineries are. And so the idea was you need to look at that impact, right? You need to continue to look at the impact of this addition of the train, because the train isn't going to stop at the 88 miles. It's going to connect to existing train. And how is this going to affect the environment? And so what came up a lot was proximate cause, whether or not kind of like proximate cause is a very typical, legal theory that's used in civil law. You could say it's even used in criminal law. The idea is like how foreseeable is it, how your current action, how foreseeable is it to cause the reaction that you have a problem with, let's say, right?
So let me give my favorite example.
Oh, good. Okay.
It's the one we learned in law school. Paul's graph versus Long Island Railroad. Remember Paul's graph?
Yeah, I do.
All right. This is how they taught lawyers, so I'm going to use it as a teachable moment for our audience. Okay. Mr. Paul's graph, back in the old-timey times, had a box of fireworks under his arm. Like when you go to the train station, you often carry a box of fireworks. He had a box of fireworks under his arm on the Long Island Railroad, and he was heading for a train. And this is the time when there were giant scales that you would use at the train. Let me get rid of this. At the train line, in order to weigh cargo and freight and that type of thing. And so there was a giant scale that weighs a lot at one end of the platform. When Mr. Paul's graph was getting on to the train, he was pushed onto the train in order not to miss it by a conductor. When he pushed him on the train, the box of fireworks hit the ground. The explosion led to a giant weight over this person's head to land on them. And they sued the Long Island Railroad, arguing that that conductor's conduct in pushing Mr. Paul, pushing whoever the guy onto the train and the drop fireworks led to the injury. And the court said no, that was not reasonably foreseeable in proximate cause, that when you push the guy in a box would drop, that a weight would fall on somebody else's head. That is too attenuated. And so that's always been one of the standards that we've used about when you look at, is it reasonable in the chain of events to believe that this caused that, therefore making that person liable? And they apply it, as you said, to environmental policy as well.
Yeah. And right. Like there in that example, probably like the fireworks is the thing that maybe isn't typically on the train, or that made it a more dangerous situation than a typical conductor pushing it on. That's probably what made it not foreseeable. So here in this example, the idea was that they were trying to argue that the businesses, let's say, for shorthand, the people trying to put this train in, were trying to say that the government shouldn't look at the environmental impact, down by the Gulf states. It's too far. Like this is beyond the reach, beyond a foreseeable reach. It's too far. And frankly, there's another agency who could look at it then. And so this particular National Environmental Agency shouldn't look at it. And of course, the argument on the other side is, well, there are only very few places who could refine this oil, and one being the Gulf states. So it is, foreseeable. Where else is this train going to take this oil, right? Not down the street. So that was kind of the argument. So essentially the railroad wants to limit. They want to limit they want a test. And this is what the justices had a problem with, because they were like, this test seems too hard to apply, to come up with that, yes, the government can look at it unless there's another agency involved, or unless the location is too far. And they didn't like, the justices have a hard time. Let's talk about that. Like often the Supreme Court has a hard time coming up with a test. That's why actually so many times they don't overrule gerrymandering, although recently they, have more often, like in Alabama, because they don't like coming up with a test. And in this situation, the railroad wanted to come up with a new test rather than just use proximate cause, because proximate cause hurts them, because it's foreseeable that there's going to be an environmental impact down in the Gulf state. They want to limit it to this idea of, if there's another jurisdiction or whatever. But so to me, that was kind of the big pushback with, Justice Sotomayor and Ketanji Brown Jackson, et cetera, was, what is your test? Like, you're not articulating that test very well.
Yeah, I think this is going to go down in flames, no pun intended. I think the MAGA led by Kavanaugh, now you got rid of Gorsuch, so it's only 8. So they need 5. Well, they always needed 5. It doesn't really matter that. I just think that, Amy Coney Barrett's like, well, there's a 150-page limit. It's very hard to do downstream and upstream analysis with the page limit. Sotomayor's like, that can't be the thing that stops the environmental, impact statement from being appropriate. The MAGA doesn't like regulation. It doesn't like environmental regulation. It doesn't like regulation that delays business in their worst instincts, and doesn't want to have a 4.5-year slowdown of construction while their cult leader and president is tweeting out and social media posting about, come give us your $1 billion and we'll give you instant environmental approvals. I don't understand how he can do that, by the way. He doesn't understand. Yeah. He doesn't understand administrative law, or he just thinks, what's he going to do? Is the EPA guy's just going to go, boom? He can't take every law off the books in 4 years. I know Donald Trump wants to do that. But he's not
his EPA person might do that, depending on who he appoints, but that goes instantly to court. And based on this discussion, where they want more, Kavanaugh's talking about deferring more to the agency.
Yeah.
It ends up getting litigated.
Yeah, agreed. And it gets tied up in court. And that's where the lawyers come in, at the intersection of law and politics. Yeah. You want to touch on a fun story, then we'll wrap it up, about Ketanji Brown Jackson hitting the boards in New York?
Okay, I loved this story. So her book just came out. I'm planning on reading it. I love reading their books, by the way. Justice Sotomayor's book was fantastic. You just learned a lot. You learn a lot about all the justices. Anyway, she wrote a book saying that it was her dream to be the first female Black Supreme Court justice who performed on Broadway. And the show and Juliet reached out to her and was like, let's make that happen. So evidently this weekend, she has an ensemble role where she's going to be on Broadway for one day and then have like a talk back afterwards. And I love this so much. For one, I just thought, because especially as a female lawyer, there's a lot of female professionals in general, they are often scrutinized more, right? Be frank about it. They're often scrutinized more. Are they not, do they not look professional enough? Are they sounding too bossy or not bossy enough? Da, 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 da. And so the idea that but it's true. That could be a whole other show. So the fact that she was like, hey, I'm going to go on Broadway, sing, maybe dance, I'm not sure what her role is, and still be taken seriously as Supreme Court justice, as a woman and as a Black woman, is like courageous. I think it's courageous. And she's willing to say, I can be it all. I can be smart and I can be fun and I can be talented. And I think that's the most amazing role model for women everywhere. So I love that story.
Yeah, we talked about it. I was like, does that fit today? And then I was like, yeah, I think it fits today. We can't do every day this ponderous, ominous, the sky is falling. We got enough going on right now. We got, shootings in the street. We've got, a president that's putting in, kind of being swept into office with a parade of criminals, con men, billionaire oligarchs don't care about the American people. We got a lot of work to do. So I am glad there could be a moment of levity and her to satisfy her dream. I've seen the show. It's I don't know exactly where she'll be. I can imagine where she'll be, but I think that's a great show. If you're in New York for the holidays, you can go see Anne Juliet, and maybe you'll get Ketanji Brown Jackson as part of your cast, which is amazing. My wife and I saw last Saturday the revival of Gypsy with Audra McDonald. And that was fantastic. So I'm big Broadway supporters and big Ketanji Brown Jackson supporters. So we've reached the end of another episode of Unprecedented, only exclusively on Legal AF on this YouTube channel. Take a minute, hit the subscribe button. If you like what we're doing, we're independent. We don't take outside money. We just keep bringing you shows like this at the intersection of law and politics. So until our next show next week, I'm Michael Popok, joined by my friend and cherished colleague, Dina Sayegh. In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories at the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.